The moment you see a baby, something happens. Your voice changes. It goes higher, slower, more musical. You stretch your vowels out. You repeat words twice. You say things like, "Who's a sleepy baby?" in a sing-song lilt you would never use with another adult. You didn't decide to do that. It just happened, and it happens across every culture on Earth. In Mandarin, in Swahili, in Quechua, in English. Scientists have a name for it: infant-directed speech. Most people call it baby talk, and most people assume the reason is pretty obvious. You talk that way because babies can't understand normal speech yet. You're simplifying. You're dumbing it down. But that explanation is incomplete. The real answer involves brain architecture, evolutionary biology, and a discovery that genuinely surprised researchers. Because you're not just simplifying, you're doing something far more specific. Let's start with the acoustics, because the acoustics are why any of this was possible. When you talk to a baby, your fundamental pitch, what scientists call the F0, rises by about 50%. Your speech slows down by roughly 20%. Your pitch range gets wider, swinging from very high to very low within a single sentence. Your vowels get exaggerated. Linguists call this hyperarticulation. When you say ball, the ah sound gets stretched and clarified in a way you'd never bother with in normal conversation. In 1994, linguist Patricia Kuhl at the University of Washington published a landmark study measuring this across 3 languages: English, Russian, and Swedish. She found that mothers in all 3 languages hyperarticulated vowels dramatically when addressing infants, far more than when speaking to adults. What she was measuring wasn't just sweetness, it was information density. Kuhl called it the acoustic motherese effect, a live tutorial in the sounds of your native language. Think of it as a phonetic map. Every language has a set of distinct sounds, phonemes, that carry meaning. English has about 44. Mandarin has about 21. Some languages have over 100. When you're born, your brain can hear all of them, every phoneme from every language on Earth. You are, at birth, a universal language learner. But by about 12 months old, that window closes. Your brain has pruned itself, keeping only the phonemes it hears repeatedly and discarding the rest. This is called perceptual narrowing, one of the most important things your brain does in its first year. Kuhl's research showed that infant-directed speech dramatically accelerates this process. Babies who received more hyperarticulated speech showed stronger phoneme discrimination at 7 months and faster vocabulary growth at 18 and 24 months. You weren't dumbing it down. You were sharpening the map, but the acoustics are only one layer, because babies aren't just learning sounds, they're also learning something harder to measure. They're learning that communication is a two-way street. In 1975, developmental psychologist Colwyn Trevarthen at the University of Edinburgh filmed hours of mother-infant interactions and noticed something nobody had formally documented before. Babies as young as 6 weeks old were taking turns, not talking, but vocalizing, pausing, watching, and vocalizing again. The mother would speak, the baby would coo, the mother would wait, then respond. Trevarthen called this proto-conversation. And it only worked because of how the adult was speaking. Infant-directed speech is full of gaps, natural pauses that invite a response. It rises at the end of phrases like a question, then drops like an answer. It's structured to feel like dialogue even when only one person is technically talking. You were teaching the baby the rhythm of conversation before they had a single word. And that rhythm turns out to matter enormously. In 2014, researchers at Princeton published an fMR, ICE study scanning the brains of adults and infants simultaneously during communication. What they found was neural coupling. The brainwaves of the adult and the baby literally synchronized during infant-directed speech. The coupling was significantly weaker when adults used normal adult-directed speech instead. The sing-song register wasn't just cute, it was functionally synchronizing 2 nervous systems. Before a baby can process a single word, their brain is already locking onto yours, riding your rhythm. And here's the part almost nobody quotes. Infant-directed speech doesn't just come from mothers. It doesn't even just come from parents. Studies show that fathers produce it just as reliably, sometimes with even wider pitch range. Children as young as 4 years old automatically shift into it when addressing infants. Adults with no children do it. People with no siblings do it. In one study, deaf adults who used sign language slowed their signing exaggerated movements, and repeated signs more often with deaf infants assigned a version of the same phenomenon. This is not learned behavior. It's something much deeper. Researchers at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology have argued that infant-directed speech is likely a human universal present in every culture ever studied. That places it in a very short list of behaviors, facial expressions, certain emotional responses, infant-directed speech. The question is, why did evolution bother? Human infants are, by almost any biological measure, absurdly helpless. A foal can walk within hours of birth. A human baby can't walk for about a year. Most mammals become largely independent within months. Human children depend on adults for roughly 15 years. Biologists call this secondary altriciality, and it happened because of our brains. Human heads got too large for the birth canal, so evolution solved it by delivering us early, before our brains finished developing. At birth, your brain was only about 25% of its adult size. A chimpanzee is born at about 40%. You came out unfinished, and that meant every caregiver around you needed to be recruited into the project of finishing you. Infant-directed speech is one of the biological tools evolution built to do that recruiting. The high pitch, the exaggerated expressiveness, the musical quality, they trigger a caregiving response in adults. They also capture infant attention with near-perfect reliability. Newborns preferentially turn toward high-pitched melodic sounds over flat, monotone ones from the first days of life. In 1987, psychologist Fernald at Stanford played recordings of infant-directed and adult-directed speech to babies with no prior exposure to either speaker. Babies as young as 4 months showed a consistent preference for the infant-directed version, regardless of language. German babies preferred it in Italian. Japanese babies preferred it in English. It wasn't about the words, it was about the shape of the sound, and that shape carries emotional information far more efficiently than normal speech. Fernald's research identified specific pitch patterns that carry consistent emotional meanings across languages. A rising then falling arc signals comfort and approval in nearly every culture studied. A sharp rising pitch signals attention. A falling, slow, drawn-out pattern signals calm and sleep. Before a baby can decode a single word, they can read your emotional intent from the melody alone. Fernald called these prosodic universals, emotional signals that predate language itself. You are essentially singing to a creature who cannot yet speak, and the singing is the message. But there's one more layer, and honestly, this one is the strangest. In 2017, a team at MIT and Harvard studied something called contingent responsiveness. They wanted to know what mattered more for language development, the quantity of words a baby heard, or the quality of back-and-forth interaction. They used audio recorders worn by children aged 4 to 6, logging thousands of hours of real home environments, then scanned the children's brains and tested language scores. The number of words the child heard was correlated with language ability. That wasn't surprising, but the number of back-and-forth conversational turns was a stronger predictor, significantly stronger. It predicted the development of Broca's area, the part of the brain most associated with language production. Children who had more conversational turns, even babbling exchanges, had measurably more developed language centers at ages 4 through 6. The input mattered, but the conversation mattered more. This is why infant-directed speech isn't just a delivery mechanism for vocabulary. It's a scaffolding system for the entire architecture of language. The exaggerated sounds teach phonemes. The musical pitch transmits emotion. The pauses teach conversational structure. The back and forth literally builds the brain, and every part of it is automatic. You didn't learn to do this. No. One taught you. You did it because evolution spent roughly 200,000 years selecting for adults who could pull a helpless, unfinished brain into language, because the ones who did it well had children who survived, and the ones who didn't. So now bring this back to the moment it started. You saw a baby. Your voice changed. That wasn't sentimentality. That was an ancient, finely tuned biological program activating exactly when it was supposed to. You were sharpening their phoneme map, synchronizing your nervous systems, transmitting emotional meaning before a single word was understood, and laying down the conversational architecture their brain would use for the rest of their life. All of that. From a voice change you didn't even notice making. Every human who ever learned to speak was taught this way. Every word you know entered your brain through a voice that slowed down, rose in pitch, and made the world simpler and more musical just for you. You weren't babied. You were built.